Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Development Control. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if a fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please note this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and mobile phones, could you please switch them off or turn them to silent. For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I am Chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making decisions on tonight's application on the agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and won't make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep to the points made on the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time, and I will advise them when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. This evening we have one item on the agenda, so hopefully it won't be too late. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. Apologies and absence for absence and substitution. I have Councillor McCormick substituting for Councillor Howard Sorrell. Declarations of interest. Are there any? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just to comment that I'm not going to be speaking as a ward member. I've divorced myself from both sides of the argument, and as my role as parish councillor, I've not taken part in any voting or decision making on that body. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin, and exactly the same applies for myself. Urgent matters, as far as I'm aware, there are none. No. Minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of April, they will be dealt with at the meeting held on the 11th of May. Sorry, that's wrong, isn't it? They will be dealt with at the next meeting anyway. Okay, applications for planning, and to introduce the item is Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. So we have a single application for you this evening for a site at Mitchens Lane in Bramley. The application seeks a temporary planning permission for the installation of a solar farm with as an operational renewable system to export a capacity of up to 45 megawatts to the national grid for a period of up to 40 years. The capacity could provide the equivalent of an annual electrical need for approximately 11,700 homes, with an anticipated displacement of over 20,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum, and provides a contribution towards the government's target to dramatically increase energy supplies from low carbon sources. The site is located to the north of Bramley and extends north and east about the Bramley substation and extends across an area of 85 hectares. Within this 85 hectares, the installation itself, being the area inside the security fencing, providing the solar panels and all its ancillary infrastructure, extends across approximately 50 hectares. The remaining 35 hectares would provide access, landscaping, grassland, biodiversity enhancements, a nature area, a potential forest school, and 4 areas are to remain available for other forms of agriculture, and that sits within fields 1, 2, 3 and 5. Assessment of the proposal does accept that there will be impacts from the development. However, these impacts are considered to be localised to the surrounding vicinity of the site due to the topography and the intervening vegetation. As such, the entire site is not visible from any one single public vantage point. In accepting that there is an impact, the application is accompanied by extensive new landscaping and biodiversity enhancements to provide reasonable mitigation to reduce the impacts to an acceptable level. The mitigation would become progressively more effective as the landscaping matures and would remain in place after the 40-year period. The site would retain existing public footpaths, and across the site would provide a new permissive path to the northeast to enable walkers to pass around the perimeter of the site rather than walking on the road. Access to the site during the construction process would be taken via Minchin's Lane using the existing field access, with a further construction access provided to Field 4 via Oliver's Lane. During operation of the site, the access would be via existing field points. If I take members' attention to the update paper, and before I run through it, if I just draw members' attention to the viewing panel, and as a verbal update, I would confirm that Councillor Faulkner attended the viewing panel and not Councillor Hussey as reported. Within the update paper, members will note that there is a further consultation comment from Bramley Parish Council, and we have received further observations in support and objection and further comments to the application. There is also officer comments towards the end of the update paper, just responding to the latest public comments received. Just providing an update on the energy strategy, which was released on the 7th of April this year. A comment about accident risk and also about pre-commencement conditions. There is also an alteration to the recommendation with amended wording of a number of conditions which you see before you, and the reason why is given within the paper. There's also an additional update to condition 23 where that is including a reason. So the application before you this evening is recommended for permission, and that is subject to a number of conditions to cover all phases of the development from construction through to decommissioning, and additionally secures further details and mitigation measures addressing aspects such as archaeology, landscaping, tree protection, biodiversity, highway safety, flooding, drainage, noise and safety of the battery systems. I've got nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. If we could have our first speakers, which is Councillor Tony Durrant and Councillor Chris Flukes on behalf of Bramley Parish Council, to the speakers' microphones, please. Thank you. You have 4 minutes between you. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the decks in front of you. I think it's the right button. The red light will come on.
There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm Tony Durrant, Bramley Parish Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. You're going to hear, I guess, an awful lot of detail this evening about the objections. I wanted to summarise very quickly in my 2 minutes. This proposal is, to me, detrimental, and to the Parish Council, detrimental to our environment. We have a loss of rural landscape, we have a loss of good agricultural land when we need to look at the carbon footprint of our food chain. It's destruction of wildlife habitats established over centuries and other existing biodiversity assets. Loss of access to and damage to the context of our archaeological heritage. Irreparable damage and loss of contacts to our best footpath, which is the Brenda Parker Way, which adversely impacts our recreational enjoyment of the area and the resulting benefits to mental health issues. Noise pollution will increase. And it has an adverse impact obviously on people and wildlife. It's a potential fire hazard in the countryside. It also forms a coalescence of two distinctly differing communities by an industrial scale installation for commercial gain. This is not a temporary structure by any stretch of the imagination. These are the real facts in summary. Additionally, the proposal seeks to have us believe solely in the applicant's narrow view of our environment. There was very poor non-existent consultation, and in certain areas, and that showed us a contempt for the people of Silchester and Bramley, which we do not deserve. The alleged benefits are based on average industry statistics and will never be fully achieved because they rely on weather, a completely uncontrollable force. The mitigation offered for the aforementioned significant adverse environmental impacts is feeble, disingenuous, and insults the communities and this council, and creates a net loss to the environment. We ask you to refuse this application for the benefit of the environment. Thank you.
Could I say now, we do not need applause. This is not a Royal Variety performance. It's a planning meeting. If the applause continues, we will have to remove you from the room. I appreciate it's emotive, but we do need to not do that. Thank you. Please continue, Councillor Flukes. We will extend your time appropriately.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Chris Flukes, the Chair of Bramley Parish Council Planning Committee, here to discuss a speculative plan to cover the land between Pound Conservation Area and Bramley with an industrialised landscape of solar panels, transformers and battery containers. Parish Council has serious safety concerns with this development. 14 two-way trips per day with articulated trucks up to 16.5 metres long through a narrow junction, up a single-track country lane into a field gate is a recipe for chaos. Please consider the route will pass the village's most used green space, the doctor's surgery and the entrance to a 200-dwelling estate with a junction which does not work as designed. We're also concerned with the safety of battery storage in light of numerous well-documented fires in such facilities. Specialist firefighting equipment is needed for lithium-ion fires, as the Boeing company would testify. You should also consider that there is a consented plan to build a feeder station for power from the Frithwood to the railway at Minchin's Bridge. This will entail yet more heavy vehicles using Minchin's Lane, and also works traversing the prospective solar site to deliver the power either underground or overhead. And in light of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, is it really a good idea to take 76 hectares of good farmland out of production? At a conservative estimate, this could produce 685 tonnes of wheat annually. You may also remember that this authority refused an application for a tiny, i.e. 50 kilowatt solar array at Church Lane Farm, Silchester, which lies just 570 metres north of this site. And the reason? The proposed development, by virtue of its siting in close proximity to a public right-of-way, would be highly visible and prominent and as a result have a significant harmful impact on the visual amenity of the area and people's enjoyment of that area from the public right-of-way. Finally, please note 683 objections, 26 supporting comments, mostly from local people. So I urge you to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the councillors? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, good evening. Could you just explain your comment about the lack of quality or depth of consultation, please?
Microphone, please.
Yeah, the Bramley Parish Council had a Zoom meeting. Some residents got, I think, a leaflet. The people of Silchester had less than that. We did respond and we didn't really receive any replies following those meetings. For a project of this magnitude affecting such a vast area and two communities, it was a poor consultation, and we certainly didn't feel that we were listened to.
Turn the microphone off, please. Any more questions for the councillors? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and see me. Would you be in favour, in principle, of a much smaller solar panel scheme? Am I right in thinking it's the sheer scale of this that is the main problem?
In the particular area that this is, were a smaller farm to be proposed, it still wouldn't fit. It still wouldn't fit the landscape. It would still have a similar effect, but albeit on a smaller scale. So, no, I think there would be opposition in putting such a proposal forward. There are better brownfield sites and other sites available within the Basingstoke and Dean area.
Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. Could you expand a bit more? You mentioned that you were concerned about fire safety and the fact it was a fire hazard. Could you expand on your concerns, please?
Well, there are several documented cases of these lithium battery packs having runaway fires in them. And the problem being that when that happens, if the fire service approach it and start squirting water into it, it makes it worse. Apart from the contamination of water sources, it can actually make the fire spread more quickly. When the Boeing Aircraft Company introduced an aeroplane with lithium-ion batteries and they had a runaway fire, the only way they could solve it was contain it in a steel box. Yeah, fair enough, these are in shipping containers, but they're lightweight. It would burn through those very quickly. And I seem to remember when we questioned this for the Bramley battery farm, which was refused, the fire and safety officer's response was, oh, we'll make sure there's plenty of water, which really doesn't solve the problem.
Thank you. Turn the microphone out, please. Any more questions for the councillors? No? Thank you, gentlemen. There's a pot of wipes in front of you, so if you can wipe down everything you've touched. We'll try and stay healthy. If we could have Councillor Graham Wright on behalf of Silchester. Good evening, Councillor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and it's the button on the microphone deck in front of you. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening. Graham Wright on behalf of Silchester Parish Council. We live on a very crowded island and need to make the most efficient use of the land that we possibly can. Industrial solar installations in the UK are a very inefficient use of land, and particularly when much of the land is high quality farmland. The community would be far better served by the farmland proposed being used for providing foodstuffs, whether for people or animal feedstock. Globally, most major solar installations are on land which is suitable for neither agricultural nor residential purposes. The proposal for a 45 megawatt capacity installation on about 85 hectares gives about 0.5 megawatts of electricity per hectare. Similar projects such as Lyneham are rated at 0.8 megawatts per hectare, which highlights the inefficiency of this proposal. The government stated for the use of good quality farmland for solar panel installations is only justified in the most compelling of circumstances. This application doesn't show compelling circumstance. The proposal doesn't comply with planning policy EM8 in that the benefit from the electricity generated from this project does not outweigh the benefit of using the land for food production. Whilst the proposal is not a housing development, policy SS6 states that developments should be on previously developed land on a site of not high environmental value and where the proposed use and scale of the development is appropriate to the site's context. This proposal clearly conflicts with this policy. The archaeological characteristics of the proposed site are an important part of the identity of the area and of considerable significance. There's a major Roman villa complex located under a part of the proposed development. If the site were to be covered in solar panels, the possibility to excavate this significant site will be lost for the lifetime of the industrial installation. The local plan is clear that our heritage assets should be preserved. The proposal runs counter to items 1.22 of the planning policy, 2.5 and 2.6, also conflicts with policy EM11. The local plan provides little guidance on large-scale industrial parks which provide neither storage nor employment. However, there are a number of policies which may be considered applicable in the case of this proposal. The plan notes on item 1.6 that the priorities include increased skills and employment, safeguard local distinctiveness, protect our environment. The proposal meets none of those priorities.
You have 1 minute.
Policy CN7 states that development proposals will be permitted where they provide or improve essential facilities and services and sustain and enhance the viability of communities. This proposal clearly runs counter to that policy. The proposed development is in conflict with policy EM10, particularly item 6.81, and the applicant has also ignored the policy of community engagement. The development is in conflict with policy EM12 in terms of noise pollution. There are very few employees on a solar installation. They're not routinely staffed. The installation will not bring employment to the district, which is in proportion to the size of the proposal, conflicting with policy EP1. The developments on greenfield land does not take into account landscape or heritage aspects and will impact the local highway network, in conflict with policy EP4. This proposal is in conflict with several policies, and Silchester Parish Council request that you decline the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you could turn your microphone off, please. Questions for the councillor? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Could I ask you to expand on what you consider to be the concerns regarding the archaeological and historic impact? What do you believe are those harm would be done?
The whole area is known as an archaeological site. It's very rich in Roman history and in pre-Roman history. In this particular case, there's known to be a very extensive Roman villa complex there, which at the moment hasn't been excavated. It's certainly a very significant site, and that opportunity would be lost for the life of the farm, potentially longer. Also, some concern about the possibility of damage to the site in the excavation work to put the panels in place. Obviously, there'll be a lot of land moving going on, considerable digging. The Roman site is not that far underground, and there's a good chance of problems occurring if we get too much digging done.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. If you could have a wipe down everything you touched, I'm sure the next speaker will appreciate it. Objectors, I've got four or five names down here. Mr. Spillane, Mr. Oborne, Mr. Hall, Mr. Grego, Mr. Griffin and Mr. Harrison, but I'm told that has been reduced to Mr. Spillane and Mr. Harrison. So if those people could come up to the microphones, please. There is a microphone each if you prefer it. However, you have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining. Your microphone is already on.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, councillors. My name is Steve Spillane. This is my friend Lee Harrison, who's representing the residents group, and Lee is going to do the speaking for us this evening.
I'm Lee Harrison, representing the 400-member Bramley Solar Farm Residents Group. We support solar as part of an overall energy strategy when combined with other long-term renewable alternatives such as offshore wind. Solar in the right place and supported by the community is a positive force, but solar done primarily to line the pockets of developers is not. Reading the officer's report, it is accepted that this vast 210-acre proposed development will damage the landscape, damage the rural character of the area, blight the setting of local conservation areas and listed buildings, remove most of the open space north of Bramley and merge it more closely with Silchester, destroy enjoyment of many public footpaths, the much-loved Brenda Parker and Silchester Ways, will become tunnels through the high fences and security cameras. It will remove for the majority of the site land which is unquestionably best and most versatile from food production and cover over important archaeological assets. This proposal therefore conflicts with several local planning policies and particularly EM1. This damage is deemed acceptable by the planning officer because it is proposed as temporary loss of amenity, temporary loss of land, etc. However, temporary is to be for 40 years. That isn't temporary. Many of the 683 people who object to this will not be around in 40 years. It's 2 generations or more. A newborn child will not see open countryside in this area until after their 40th birthday, assuming the land isn't reclassified as brownfield. So is this proposal acceptable with mitigation? Well, no. The green screening that's been proposed would take at least 15 years to become even partially effective, summer cover only, and in places would need to be many metres high to take account of the undulating landscape. This wholly out-of-place industrial installation would be clearly visible for much of the year and for much of the 40 years. So maybe it yields tangible local community benefits and is widely supported by them. Well, that's not true either. The developer has chosen to opt for as large an area as they think they can get away with. This isn't a modest application. It's driven by maximising profits for distant investors at the expense of local communities. Where is the local consent that the government requires in its energy security strategy published earlier this month? 683 real objections and only 26 in favour. That isn't local consent. To sum up, there are 4 key reasons why this application is unacceptable. 1, its sheer scale. 1, being one of the largest industrial installations on greenfield in the country. 2, its detrimental impact on the landscape. We've learned in lockdown the vital importance of open spaces for our physical and mental health. The landscape is much used and very highly valued. 3, the loss of good quality farmland. We can't replace agricultural fields and we can't grow wheat on warehouse rooftops where solar panels can be fitted. Greenfields are for food, not for huge industrial installations. And 4, the loss of our archaeological heritage for generations. Under MPPF 174, councils should make decisions that contribute and enhance the natural environment by protecting and enhancing valued landscapes and recognise the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. This in itself should be sufficient guidance to reject this application. It's a massive and unwelcome industrialisation of the countryside, which your community values incredibly highly.
I have to ask you to wind up, please.
Please help us to protect it by rejecting this speculative and for-profit application. Thank you.
Thank you. Could turn the microphone off, please. Questions for the speakers? No? Thank you very much, gentlemen. If you could have a wipe down before you leave, would be appreciated. Next speakers I have are Mr. Haffenden, Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Rosen, Mr. O'Hare and Mr. Leaney. You have 4 minutes between you. I will warn you when you will have 1 minute remaining, and the first microphone is on, so it's up to you from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Simon Wheeler. I'm the Head of Development from Enzo Energy, the applicant. A lot's been said about this application, and it's not possible to cover each of the points that's been raised in the few minutes that we have now. Fortunately, this committee provides the opportunity for questions, and this is not often the case. And I feel this is a really important part of your decision-making process. I encourage you to take that opportunity, and it wouldn't be right for you to make a decision that was based on things that have been said that are wrong. This application's been through a very robust process. We've engaged specialists and experts in their fields to assess our proposals. Your officers and other consultees, experts in their fields, have reviewed these assessments. None have any objections. Catherine, your officer, An experienced professional planner has the envious task of managing and coordinating this process and coming to a balanced decision, weighing up the merits and impacts of the application and assessing against your policies. That balanced decision is before you in the report now, and it concludes that the application should be approved. In 2019, this council declared a climate emergency. Severe weather events in the borough have shown that the global issue of climate change is now a local problem, and reducing our area's carbon emissions and planning for the effects of extreme weather is high on our agenda. It's a powerful statement. They're your words. You've since gone further and you've supported the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. You've written to MPs urging them to support ambitious action to tackle climate change. Here, now, is your chance to take action. This project will deliver enough renewable energy to supply around 20 to 25% of all the homes in this borough. It's probably the single biggest action this council can take right now to tackle climate change. We welcome your questions on any aspect of this application. I reiterate that every possible aspect of the project has been studied and assessed by experts in their fields. We've worked hard to address their concerns. We've achieved the outcome of no objections from many of these expert consultees. Our assessment needs to be robust to withstand this scrutiny and potentially the scrutiny of a planning inspector in the event that the application should be referred to them. I appreciate this is a difficult decision. There's local objection, there always is. But the evidence that supports this application is strong and it is before you now. The emergency is still here and it's more urgent now than it was in 2019. And now I hand over to Alan.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Alan Haffenden. In the 30 years I've been resident in Bramley, my wife and I have seen a significant expansion of the village, but only one development proposal has decided to be enough to write to the council, this one. Since I wrote that letter on the 1st of February last year, I've not seen or heard anything from anybody to persuade me to change my mind. Quite the opposite. I'm concerned about the delay and the news over the last 15 months has underscored the importance of locally sourced energy.
You have 1 minute remaining.
There are and will continue to be significant climate challenges facing our planet. The opponents of this development acknowledge this, but do not wish to see Bramley contribute towards a solution. However, the need for everyone in the borough to contribute is one of the areas of focus in this council's climate change and air quality strategy. While it's right that this committee considers the objections, I would ask you to consider the impact of this proposal on the community beyond Bramley and Silchester throughout the borough. Take local action to address a global threat. Lead by example. Disallow the myopic self-interest of the objectors and grant this development for the greater good. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? No, your time's up anyway. Thank you. Questions for the speakers? Councillor Godison.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just, I am right, am I not, that these gentlemen there represent the applicant?
You're quite right.
Right, thank you. Just a brief question, if I may. On page 20, describing the proposal, it's talking about the structure of the panels. It finishes off by saying, galvanized steel or aluminium fixed to the ground by a combination of concrete feet and pile-driven posts to below ground depths of 2 to 2.5 metres. On page 130, talking about condition number 4, it does seem to imply that should the final decision be to return this land to agriculture, condition 4 states the removal of the solar panels and associated above ground works approved under this position doesn't appear to comment on the below ground works. And I presume we're talking about many thousands or many hundreds, many thousands of concrete pile-driven posts. How would you anticipate extracting them from the ground in order to return it to agriculture?
They're effectively fence posts. They'll be pulled from the ground and removed.
I'm sorry?
The posts that the solar panels are installed on are effectively fence posts. At the end of the life of the project, they would be removed, pulled from the ground and taken from the site.
That's pretty major. If I may say so, that is a major undertaking. Can I ask how many posts you would anticipate would need to be removed?
All of them.
Yeah, which is how many?
I couldn't possibly give you a number.
Yeah.
It would be many thousands, and the task of extracting them would be exactly the same as the task of installing them.
Fine, right. So all I could suggest is the borough officers might consider adding something to.
Sorry, Councillor
condition
Gatterson,
number 4.
this is questions, not advising the borough officers what they should and shouldn't be doing. Thank you. Any more questions for the speakers? Councillor Freeman.
I've got two really. First of all, there have been a lot of concerns raised around fire safety. How would you seek to address those concerns?
So the batteries that are installed come with fire suppression measures. Now these batteries are being installed around the world at the moment because they're an important part of the response as we change from fossil fuel powered electricity to renewables, which is variable. So the installations themselves come with fire suppression measures. You're absolutely right that water doesn't put these fires out, which is why the containers come with fire suppression measures. Now, I would ask you, if these things were prone to bursting into flames, why would we be putting them in? Would that be a wise thing for us to spend our money on? I would ask you if you walk around with a mobile phone in your pocket. I know I do at the moment. I'm not concerned about it bursting into flames. Okay, it's the same. It's not a likelihood. It's a very, very remote possibility. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it hasn't ever happened, because anybody with a computer will Google and find that it possibly has, in very limited occasions, considering the amount of these that are now installed around the world.
But considering the amount of woodland and extra planting, do you really think that, I do think that fire safety issues need to be considered?
Can we stick to questions, and can those people who are not speaking please turn the microphones off when they're not speaking? Thank you. Councillor Freeman, do you have another question?
I do. There have also been several concerns raised around the impact on the local wildlife. For instance, the deer, which currently use the fields there to migrate across and go about their merry way. Also the hunting grounds for things like red kites and local owls. These will all be severely impacted by the installation of all these solar panels. How do you answer that?
I agree they will be impacted in a very positive way. Okay, so these installations will be a net benefit to biodiversity in a massive way. Currently, the area is agricultural. Agricultural areas are not good for biodiversity. So by increasing and incorporating the measures that we have, everything from invertebrates up through the food chain will benefit from the impacts of not being farmed in agriculture.
But how will the deer benefit from not being able to use their normal crossings? And now my concern is all these solar panels are on farmland, and you've got all these birds of prey that use the land to hunt. How are they going to be able to effectively hunt with the solar panels in place?
I think you're probably underestimating the ability of wildlife to adapt. There's 60 million acres in this country. They can move very easily in areas around disturbance. It happens all the time as you build houses and roads, and everything else that we do in society has an impact. And this, on net benefit, is significantly beneficial to the local environment and local wildlife and biodiversity. It's one of the main, apart from the massive offset of carbon dioxide and the production of renewable energy, it is one of the main benefits of these types of developments.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the likely land use, I have heard that there are new proposals in foreign countries to try and maintain the use of arable land. Is that your intention in this case, or is there anything stopping you from doing that?
there's nothing stopping us, and we are looking to try and incorporate things like that because it is becoming the norm in other countries around the world. It's a technique called agrivoltaic, which, as it suggests, is the incorporation of agriculture into photovoltaic developments. The easiest measure of that is to incorporate animal grazing, for example, sheep grazing into the arable fields, and for them to graze the grass that grows around the development. But it is possible, and we are actively pursuing other measures to look at other crops and plants that can be grown between the rows of panels.
Councillor Gaskell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going back to the issue raised regarding fire. You mentioned the fire suppression system. Can I ask you what sort of gas you would use for that? And have you put in the planning application the storage of that? And are the local fire brigade geared up to deal with a fire with gas suppression?
So my understanding is that this will be subject to a battery safety management plan that will be submitted as part of the installation. I can't tell you what gas is used in the fire suppression, and it's not my field of expertise, and I'm not going to try and guess what that is. But the batteries will come, and the standard condition is that they come with a safety management plan that will document what would happen in the event of a fire and how the batteries are designed to deal with that.
My concern here is that if it's a gas suppression system, then you need gas storage. That's not part of the plans, and we need space for that, so we need to look at that. We don't know what size it is. Can I finish? If it's not a gas suppression system and you're using cooling water, or the fire brigade using cooling water, then you need a bonded system, you need fire water tanks, and you need a way of containment.
Could I stop you for a minute? Could you ask, we're dealing with questions to the speakers. Could you ask your question, please?
Well, my question is, why are they not included on the plans?
Because the fire suppression methodologies and techniques are incorporated into the battery storage containers.
Any more questions? No? Thank you, gentlemen. If you can have a wipe down with the wipes provided. And Councillor Mahaffey.
Chair, before I start, can I raise a point of order? I'm looking through the document pack I have in front of me. Professor Mike Fulford, who is the Reading University archaeologist that's dug on the Roman site for the last 20 years, has written a very strongly worded objection letter. Can I ask if members have actually seen that letter? Because I can't see it in front of in the document in front of me.
Apparently it's a written representation which cannot be submitted tonight. So,
but does that mean the members have seen it or not?
Hold on.
Thank you, Councillor Mahaffey. So if it's coming as a letter of representation, it would have been consumed within the summary of representations in the normal process. If anyone's viewed it online, then it would have been on there since the receipt of that letter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahaffey. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, we must support the government's drive to decarbonise the grid. But just as when we consider housing, there are good proposals and there are bad ones. Please do not let us fall into the trap of thinking this is solar, so it must be good. This is a 200-acre industrial installation comparable in size to the whole of Bramley and over twice the size of Silchester. Please also, let's not pretend that this development is temporary. In the consultation process, the community was told that ENSO would put in place an insurance policy to guarantee decommissioning. I work in the insurance industry, and there is no such policy that will indemnify a customer against a legally required outcome. When this was pointed out, the community was told that a bond would be put in place. I wrote and inquired about the nature of this bond, and we were subsequently told that what they actually meant was a planning condition. How on earth are we going to enforce a condition to spend the millions of pounds required to decommission this site in 35 years? The structure of the company, with a holding company and 32 operating companies, is designed to flow money away from the site and the landowner will be left with a multi-million-pound liability for decommissioning. The only economic outcome of this exercise is for the site to become brownfield housing. As a council, we now live with the legacy of bad decisions made by previous administrations. Let's not do the same for our successors. So what does this mean? The Silchester Roman town is nationally important and is key to the identity of the parish. We will permanently lose the huge villa complex that's located below Field 1, conflicting with policies EM8, EM10, EP4, and most importantly, EM11. We have an increasing global demand for food, and the food deficit through the loss of this land must be made up elsewhere. We cannot manufacture agricultural land except by chopping down rainforest. We would have to import the lost grain production, meaning increased carbon miles and reduced national food security. Let's not forget that 10% of the world's grain is currently produced in the Ukraine. The landscape report is misleading at best. In many cases, the photos are close-ups of single bushes amongst sparse areas of patchy vegetation, and in some cases, even facing in the opposite direction to the site. The landscape officer states he's conducted an assessment at least partly by Street View. He requested corresponding winter photos, but has accepted the applicant's response that they didn't have time. You've seen for yourself how it will be impossible to screen this site in winter. Contrary to what is said in the landscape report, you have also seen the direct line of sight between the national monument and the proposed solar site. Policy EM1 refers to landscape and states that development must respect, enhance, and not be detrimental to the character or visual amenity of the landscape.
You have 1 minute.
It must also respect the sense of place, tranquility or remoteness, and the quiet enjoyment of the landscape from public rights of way. Policy EM8 states that proposals for the commercial generation of land will be permitted unless there are adverse environmental, economic or social impacts. Impacts include agriculture, heritage assets, landscape and visual appearance. The Penso battery installation, the Redlands application and the previous application for a solar array on this very same farm were all rejected on the grounds of landscape impact. In addition, less than 1 month ago, we passed a motion to protect the nature and character of rural communities. All I'm asking is for you to be consistent with your previous decisions that you've made, as the residents of Bramley have suffered unfairly from overdevelopment for many years. We should not be surrendering agricultural land to industrialisation when we are still not requiring housing and warehouses to have solar panels on their roofs. I urge you to reject this proposal. And if I have a moment, I do have a response to your question earlier, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Questions to Councillor Mahaffey, and I think we'll start with Councillor Harvey. If there's a question.
That was the reason I asked for the whether or not you'd seen Professor Mike Fulford's report. We joked actually at EPH a while ago about which was the oldest settlement in the UK, and I think I proved at the time the Iron Age settlement underneath the Roman town is the oldest settlement in the UK, the oldest formal settlement. The site is visible from the wall, and I urge you, well, a bit late now, but I would have liked you to have looked at Mike Fulford's objection to this application, because he did say this is a nationally important site and we're potentially losing nationally important archaeology. It is wrong to say that the national monument, the ancient monument, is just the wall. If you look at the scheduling, it actually extends several hundred yards outside the wall, and this is directly on the border of it. And I echo Councillor Wright's comments earlier on about the potential damage to this. My argument is this is permanent loss, so we're going to lose permanently nationally important archaeology.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Mahaffey? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your time at the viewing. One thing we weren't able to do was to actually go on top of the wall where we saw people walking to see what the view was there. If you've been up on that wall in the past, could you see the fields in question in the planning application?
I think I've taken a photo of it, and I'm not sure if it was included, but yes is the answer. There's a direct line of sight. I do take the point that in the landscape report it said you can't see it. And in the summer you can't, because there are trees on the leaves. There are trees on the leaves, leaves on the trees. But in winter, it's a completely different thing. And as I did point out at the viewing panel, a lot of the current shielding is cricketback willows. Cricketback willows are commercially planted, they're scheduled for removal or harvesting.
Thank you. Turn the microphone off, thank you. Any more questions for Councillor McCormick? For Councillor Mahaffey, sorry. No, I have one. Can you tell me how big an area would be covered with solar panels which has archaeological or is likely to have archaeological remains in it?
It is field, correct me if I'm wrong, gents, because I got this wrong the other day. I think it's field 1, isn't it? It's the top one. It's again, we're going to argue size. Gentleman behind me will say it's small. I'm going to say it's large. I encourage people to look on Google Earth. I believe you can see the imprint extending pretty much up to the footpath that bisects field 1.
Thank you. And do we have any idea what may lie under that?
I couldn't tell you at the moment, but it's long been known, and Professor Mike Fulford said it is a villa complex. We tend to think of villas as being a house. That's not the case in sort of Roman villa terms. They are large, complex areas with multiple houses, multiple settlements.
Thank you. Any more questions from anybody? Thank you, Councillor Mahaffey. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just following public speaking, just because Councillor Goodson asked the question direct of planning officers around the wording of condition 4, and it was just to confirm that the wording of that condition could be amended to effectively remove the words above ground, so that it effectively be all associated works if that was the concern. So it's just to clarify that for the committee.
Thank you, Mike. Questions to officers? Councillor Tomlin, followed by Councillor Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, we heard from one of the objectors, they made a comment that the green screen, the proposed green screening, will take 15 years plus to become partially effective. Is this true? Could you just give us some concept of how quickly or how fast we can expect screening? Thank you.
As with all planting, it will take some time to mature. So, of course, there will be a period of time whilst the screening isn't as effective as it will be in the longer term. However, as part of the consideration of the application, there has been discussion with the applicants and revised planting schemes were submitted, which would include some larger species. So rather than coming in with very smaller trees of smaller heights, they would come in with some larger, higher species in order to assist with bringing that mitigation and that screening forward at the earliest possible opportunity. There is a slide within the pack that you have seen before us that does show cross sections and how this screening is looking to mature. So if you have that before you, the one on the screen at the moment, members may be able to pick out sort of a purpley pink line sort of halfway up each illustration, and that is at a 10-year height. Also, members will have been familiar with the landscape and ecological plan that was provided within the pack. It's also within your agenda, and you can pick out on there are areas where there's going to be denser screening, there's woodland screening, and areas where the visibility of the solar farm would be more apparent, and those are the areas which would have that reinforced and that sort of greater height at planting species going in. So the screening is looking to go around the site in its entirety, but of course, yes, it will take some time to mature, as with any landscaping scheme on any development.
Councillor Hussey.
There's been a wide range of objections to this application, and I would like the officer's advice, certainly on two, which I believe are not material to determining whether this application should be accepted or refused. I've already had the answer, but the reason for asking now is so that the whole committee and the members of the public will appreciate it as well. One of the objections, and the words are, Enzo claimed their proposed development needs to be connected to a large substation like Bramley Frith, and therefore big. However, this is simply not the case. That's the first is that relevant to this application in terms of planning planning reasons for potential refusal? And also, there are some derogatory comments about Enzo themselves and their ability to build this particular site should it be approved. So I would like your views on whether those can be considered as material objections or we can just park them on one side.
So in terms of the connection to the substation and its location, members will note from the agenda that you have before you on how this site was selected, and that the farm will need to connect to the national grid. So we are looking at a connection point, and of course around that connection point we are looking at what is the impact of that development and is the land available and suitable. So this is also going to have regard to the site constraints and engagement with landowners. So in this case, this is where this site has come forward. It does have that relationship to the substation, but there is no policy requirement to demonstrate that they have to provide a site selection, and therefore it wouldn't be reasonable to refuse permission on this ground. In terms of the nature of the company, again, I draw members' attention to page 125 of the agenda, which confirms that planning permission runs with the land as opposed with the landowner or the developer. So therefore, with any development, whether it's residential, commercial, the trading particulars of an applicant, whether an individual or company, are not a material planning consideration. Therefore, it would be unreasonable to refuse permission on the company structure or their trading experience.
Councillor Freeman.
We can see from the report that this is high quality agricultural land. How can we justify taking away that, especially at a time when we are going to need to be growing more of our own, producing more of our own food, especially with regards to Brexit, etc. I just think it's very high quality land to be shoving solar panels on. I mean, most solar panels sites, especially anything this big, is usually sort of low quality land or previous industrial land. So what's the thinking behind using high quality agricultural land for this?
So again, I draw your attention to the officer's report where the consideration of the agricultural land has been set out before you. So the site does comprise grade 2 and subgrade 3A agricultural land, which is considered to be high quality, and then also subgrade 3B, which is of a moderate quality. So there is a mix of qualities on the site. Yes, there isn't grade 4 or 5, which is the poorer quality land, and there isn't brownfield land. But then it's part of that overall balancing exercise that we need to undertake, whether we are looking at the agricultural land, its quality, and of course the use of that land, or what is grown on that land, whether it has crops or animals, that is in the gift of the farmer at the end of the day. But also when we're looking at this site, we're looking at what is that balance? Are we looking at that energy generation, the contributions towards the landscape, the biodiversity, all the issues that you have before you this evening? And as I say, it's part of that balance that you have before you that you have to decide upon.
Thank you.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the scheduled ancient monument at Silchester and the apparent overlap of part of the scheme and land of what could be immense archaeological significance. I have actually managed to locate online the letter from Professor Michael Fulford, OBE, who I understand is a very knowledgeable person on the subject of ancient history. It was hidden away amongst 907 other documents as a neighbour comment. Given the overlap with scheduled ancient monument and the policies that we have with scheduled ancient monuments, I'm struggling to understand why this wasn't given any additional weight, given that we've had all sorts of other consultee representations in over 200 pages of documentation. Was this simply an oversight, or does the knowledge of somebody who, you know, is one of the top most knowledgeable people in the field not count for anything in terms of a scheduled ancient monument and the relevance of this to the planning application?
So the representation that you are referring to, of course, would have come in as part of the overall public comments to the application, hence why it was recorded as a neighbour comment. Now, for the consideration of scheduled monuments, the statutory consultee here is actually Historic England. They were consulted on the application twice, and in both instances they came back with no objection and were happy to defer to our Historic Environment team, who again have not objected to the application. So whilst there is obviously that expertise that has come through the representations, this particular individual, obviously with their expertise, was not a consultee, so therefore their comments wouldn't have been reflected as such, and of course were amalgamated with all the other comments that were received on all the issues on the application.
Thank you. Any more questions?
That does seem to be a bit of an oversight and a missed trick, because surely this guy, we should have people who are looking at expert testimony, and also surely Professor Fulford and people in Heritage England talk to each other about these things. I'm astonished that it's been relegated, no disrespect to any other neighbour comments, but it's very hard for people to pick that out when you've got 906 other documents there.
Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going back to the point, the section on the fact the application is on the land and not on the applicant. As a council, I wonder, where is the liability held if the development, shall we say, failed halfway through, because it's going to be an extremely costly effort, and at the end of it, where the liability is for decommissioning, if it's on the landowner, how does that work if, for instance, the landowners are just the original farmers who simply wouldn't be able to fund what would be a multi-million-pound exercise?
Thank you, Councillor Faulkner. So, as the point that Catherine raised earlier, is obviously the applicant's position isn't relevant or material consideration. The key issue is whether the planning conditions that are imposed are enforceable or not. Our view as an LPA is that they are. The reason for that is that they are enforceable against the landowner and any contractual obligation he has with whoever is entered into at that time. That is the position on any planning condition that is imposed by this authority on any planning application. The conditions that are in the pack, so the ones that effectively deal with the issue of decommissioning, that's either at the end of the 40 years or sooner if it stops generating for more than 12 months, are relatively standard conditions, very similar to ones on appeals of larger schemes than this that can be seen sort of, nationally. So they are very sort of standard conditions in terms of this type of development.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Leeks.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard two times today, 35 years and 40 years. What is it, please?
The application is seeking planning permission for a temporary operational period of up to 40 years.
So 40 years is temporary, is it?
Yes.
Thank you. I see no more hands up. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to explore a little bit into officers' views on the potential loss of biodiversity and geodiversity against policy EP4. We've heard that from objectors that there will be a loss of deer, red kites and the like. We've also heard from the applicant that this will not be so. I'd like to hear Pana's views on that, please.
So the development across the site will inevitably change the habitat for some species, for example, the routing of deer, where of course they have the wider countryside to roam, as they would if we had any development that occurs on the edge potentially of a settlement. Now, this particular application has been supported by extensive details of biodiversity enhancements to benefit other species of wildlife across the site, and that's through planting and also fixtures such as bird and bat boxes and things like that. Overall, the development is proposing a net gain in biodiversity of 33%. So they are looking to improve the biodiversity value of the site. Of course, that will change the habitat of some species, but again, it will improve the habitat for other species. So that is part of that balance that you have before you this evening.
Sorry, Chair, just a point of order. I was actually trying to hear the planning officer's last comments when there was a lot of murmuring from the public gallery, and I couldn't hear that. So could you please repeat that, your last couple of comments again, please?
So, I touched on the biodiversity enhancements, so the planting and also the other aspects of biodiversity gain, which would, of course, as I said, would impact on some species, but of course provide enhancements for other species. And overall, the development is looking to bring a 33% increase in biodiversity net gain when you're looking at those measurable increases on site. I think that may be what I've covered.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. Given the applicant has actually made several reductions in the scale of the proposed development, if this should go ahead, is there anything in the future to prevent him coming back and actually asking for additional capacity and additional area?
So if the application were to be expanded, for example, in area, then of course that would be subject to a planning application that would need to be considered on its merits at that time.
Thank you very much.
I see no hands up, so I've got one question. Could we have the slide back up which showed the planting with the pink line across it? Thank you. That pink line, I believe, is at 10 years, and the black line at 20, therefore 20 years.
So just to confirm that the pink line is the 10 years, the black line at the top, I think, is just demarcating different parts of the site.
Okay, and at how many years do you consider the screening has become effective?
Again, that would depend on your definition of effective, but where the landscape officer has considered the scheme and considered the landscaping that's being proposed, they've considered that 15-year period as being effective.
Thank you. So that effective, I'll leave the word effectively out. That means for 1/3 of the life of this application, the screening is considered ineffective.
So the screening would still be developing at that stage, but of course the landscaping would remain past the life of the development as well. So that would remain in perpetuity beyond the 40-year timescale that's being applied for.
Thank you. Are there any more questions to officers? No. In that case, debate. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick off. We've had some very passionate speeches this evening. Lots of viewpoints. And then I'd note referral to 680 plus objections, which is quite a significant number of objections in any application that we've ever seen, I think. It's a very difficult decision, this. The way I see it, there are two valid arguments, if you like, and that is one, the climate emergency and the reduction in the country's reliance on fossil fuels. The second one is versus the loss of our quality countryside, the breathing spaces, the amenity, we've heard local mental health, all those sort of things, and the only walks that are available between the villages of Bramley and Silchester. I mean, on the site visit, we had a lovely sunny day, to be fair. It certainly showed off the beauty of the countryside. I think members would agree that we're on there. It showed us the walks and it showed us the tranquility of the whole area. So again, though, this application will deliver renewable energy for most of the year, obviously not at night or during the winter months. It certainly won't address the cost of energy right now that we faced. It's not going to make energy any cheaper for us right now. It is a commercial enterprise. It's first and foremost a commercial enterprise. It's located on this site, really, as it's the cheapest connection available to the national grid, in my opinion. Now, I've personally invested in solar panels. I've probably bored people to death with it, but I've become addicted to the control app that I have on my phone. And in less than 2 years, I have made a year's worth of my electrical usage by renewable energy, and I've saved 1.5 tonnes of carbon dioxide. It's technology that we must embrace as part of our future energy generation. But it's got to be part of a portfolio, I feel, of methods. I mean, clearly we hear offshore wind is favoured at the moment by the government. We're looking at potentially every house in the country being powered in the next 10 to 20 years if it all goes according to plan. Solar generation, it can be delivered without the loss of quality land. It's been referred to tonight. We've got many warehouse roofs available. I've recently driven through Europe. Well, I've done it several times, but I've recently driven through Europe, and you'll see panels on all types of buildings, from farms, factories and offices. Perhaps we as the borough should be encouraging community groups who could actually fund some of these panels on buildings and take the benefits of cheaper energy that they do it and pay back locally. Surely that's the way forward. We should be thinking along those lines. But these solar parks are coming forward. There was a couple, one referred to in our officers' pack in Nottinghamshire rather. Looking on Google, it looks like rolling open countryside. I expect they have some issues there, but it's certainly a more open aspect. The officer kindly sent us an outline battery safety management plan, and on that it was for a place called Little Crow Solar Park in Scunthorpe. Now that's 90 megawatts, so double the size of this. So I looked at the aerial shots that it supplied, and it shows it adjacent and around a massive steelworks. I mean, it's ideal. Brownfield site. What a good place to put it. There are many such sites, farms on solar farms on brownfield land, disused airfields. Brilliant. And potentially you could argue alongside major road corridors. That's a contentious one. But maybe we as a borough should be considering where we should seek out these sites and not leave it to a developer to come forward and then have a contentious battle on our hands. I picked up the comments and some of our councillors said about the temporary nature. I mean, I thought temporary in planning terms was 5 years, 40 years. I mean, it's generational. And as we've said, I certainly won't be around in 40 years. I'd like to think I could be, but I don't think I will be. And this is the reason for approval. Number two, it talks about use of high quality agricultural land, but it uses the argument it's temporary, it can come back. But we need it, I think, now. We need to rely on the self-production of food more and more. So is another angle on this heat or eat argument, but I'll move on from that. Wildlife. We've also declared our own environmental ecology emergency. We've read in the report skylarks and are present. The deer herds roam across this land. But, you know, I fear that these poor old deer are going to be unable to appreciate the information boards that are going to be proposed, which will inform them that their loss is for the good of renewable energy generation. But anyway, I think that's a very sad situation. Now, noise, that's an interesting one. I read that we don't have an issue with noise. I remember at the viewing panel, one of the councillors asked for us to be quiet as we stood near the Brenda Parker Way. Now, for those of you, the Brenda Parker Way is a 78-mile national long route from Aldershot to Andover. And Brenda Parker worked for the Ramblers for many years, leading walks and writing books as well as being their chair, just for the record. When we asked for quiet, we stopped talking. There was absolute silence except for some annoying bird singing. Now, the noise impact report that the applicant has submitted states that the sound generated by the equipment and the operation will be below the measured existing background noise. That's part of the condition. And so the report says it will be. But there are only 3 receptor sites, I've read. 2 were to the northern edge of the site, near local Silchester housing, and 1 was by St James's Park, which is the estate in Minsons Lane in Bramley. None of them, no reception sites, were within the panel equipment or in the installation compounds. And the report actually has a table. It states that the inverter equipment will have a typical sound level of 62 decibels plus a 2 extra factor for experimental error or whatever. They also have a table that defines this noise level as a typical high street noise level. So the footpaths pass right through these areas. So we will have impact on wildlife and the enjoyment of our public right-of-way by noise as well. Safety, that's been a big issue. We've heard lots of comments about batteries. We've had the battery installation at Bramley in the past. I'm not really happy using condition 32 to require a battery safety management plan. The one that we were given, some councils were supplied, really is just a sort of description of the safety technical features, its control and monitoring how the equipment talks to itself and the strategy, the control strategy and fire suppression equipment. But what it misses, it doesn't have any sections of how we're going to deal with an emergency with the health and safety executive and the fire brigade. There's no input. So should we choose to approve this, I would strongly request that we rework this condition to actually bring the fire brigade and that in there, because if they do have a disaster, and God forbid that we do, and the containers do rupture, we could get clouds of toxic gas near some of the housing, because it's not that far away from housing. So, I don't know, it's a balance. We've all said it's a balance. It's the way planning works. And basically, I think that hearing what everybody said, reading everything that I've read, and the feel, and after the viewing panel, then I'm going to move for refusal. And on the grounds that landscape impact, it's the visual amenity, views, the character of open spaces, trees and woodlands, dark landscape and historic landscape. We've obviously got the Roman settlements and potentially archaeological sites we've been discussing. We've got shipping containers on a rise looking over Bramley, which is, again, contrary to a lot of the Bramley Neighbourhood Development Plan policies and views. And we will have the quiet enjoyment of the landscape from public rights of way. That's in our policy, EM1, strongly will be hit. And then, again, policy EM8, I think that's used in our justification. But of course, it's requiring us to put a development that will have no adverse environmental social impact without any long-term impact. And I'm afraid I think this will have it. So, on that basis, I'd like to hear other, obviously, debate, but I will make a move for refusal on the grounds of EM1 and EM8. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Harvey, followed by Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second Councillor Tomlin's motion. This is a very detailed application that has an awful lot of parts to it. It isn't simply a solar farm. There are a lot of other elements that go with it in terms of the application before us. I'm very clear that the Council has declared an ecological emergency and a climate emergency. I'm very clear that there are occasions when those two declarations actually come into conflict with each other because their priorities are not always aligned. And how we balance all of that, I think, is part of the debate we're going to have this evening. I would love to see the local plan actually identify sites with community support that are sites that people feel comfortable within their communities bringing forward solar farms. I think that's a proactive thing that this authority could do. I think this isn't the first solar farm that Basingstoke has seen, but by goodness me, this is the first controversial or the most controversial application I've seen in a very, very long time, with over 692 objections. And it feels a little bit like the argument being put forward is grasping at the first thing that's come along. We need to grasp this, we're desperate for this. So we take the commercial proposal that's in front of us because that that's the desperation we find ourselves in to deliver the agenda of climate change. I think the proposal, or these kind of proposals, do need to benefit the community. And there is no indication in this that this will in any way, shape or form directly benefit the community. It isn't as if you're going to get cheaper fuel off the back of this. It isn't as if the community will directly benefit from some kind of trust or cooperative that might be established that relates to this. And I think those proposals would be worthy of consideration. But none of that, and the climate change nor the ecological emergency debate, are actually relevant to what we're discussing tonight. And it would be absolutely scurrilous of us to take that on board, because we are a planning committee with planning policies that we must judge an application on. Now, the applicant has introduced those arguments emotionally, and so have the residents, for understandable reasons. But the point is, we have an application in front of us that we have to judge against the set of policies this council has adopted, and that is the judgment that we've got to come to. So we're not debating climate change, as important and as critical as it is, and if the new local plan comes up with policies that enable us to do that, I'd be the first sat here arguing the cause. I think we are debating the specific proposals, we are debating the specific site in its specific context, with the specific consequences that it creates, and the harm or not that it would do. That would be what the approval or rejection would be based on. So I think there are genuine planning concerns, actually, that have been raised this evening that are worthy of consideration. Now, I'll declare that I am a Reading alumni, and I know Professor Fulford's work well. And on that basis, I take very seriously the archaeological issues that are raised because of the context of Field 1 and the Roman villa that is believed to be under there. And that should not be dismissed. And I think we as a council need to take our particular policy very seriously. That no damage should come to that, and we take the actual historic environment in terms of EM11, the policy, very seriously. I think EM1, in terms of landscape, is also very relevant and very important. The context of this application has to be set in the context of what it would do to Bramley and what it would do to Silchester and what it would do to the immediate landscape that is there. Does it do harm? And I think the balance of the argument, based upon the report and the evidence that's been presented this evening, is that it would do landscape harm to both of those communities, and it would do landscape harm to the countryside. In the context of the agricultural land, it is a policy element that we can take into account. And again, on the agricultural land, it is, as officers rightly say, high quality agricultural land. Therefore, the offsetting, the balance of offsetting to solar farm and a solar powered and also battery storage is something that needs to be considered. And I think the argument in favour of high quality agricultural land is one again that we shouldn't simply dismiss. It's an important argument. So the question becomes, in the context of this application, with the detail in it set against our policies, is this application justified? Not a debate about climate change or the ecological emergency, but purely looking at the detail of the application. And I feel that the evidence presented before us within the red line is such that at this moment the application should be rejected, because I believe on landscape grounds, and in particular on heritage impact and the critical importance of the archaeological site, it would do harm. And that would be how I feel about the application at this moment.
Thank you. I've got Councillor McCormack, myself and Councillor Freeman in that order. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this is quite possibly the most difficult application I've had to consider, and I've had some real run-ins in the last couple of years. We've had Culver Road, we've had Camrose, we've had M3 Junction 7, we've had Many Down, we've had the golf course, we've had a whole load of them. I'm a big fan of looking at accelerating our borough's aspirations towards achieving climate neutrality. I was the seconder of the climate emergency motion back in 2019. We haven't made sufficient progress in achieving that. But when I look at this scheme, I'm not a big fan of it, to be honest. If there's certain things that don't sit right, not least the villa on Field 1 and the potential for that to be damaged. And I can't ignore 682 letters of objection either. I think the difficulty in this is arriving at material reasons for refusal. Now, I can think of putting out material reasons for refusal like running contrary to policies EM8 and EM11. I'll leave it to the mover as to what reasons they want to choose. But I think at the end of the day, this is in many ways an opportunistic site. It's close to the substation, and I guess we're supposed to think, yay, 200 acres or whatever it is of solar panels near a substation. It's going to take a few years to be built. And I do take on board what Councillor Mahaffey said. Within a mile of me, there's the Hound Mills Industrial Estate. Many square metres, thousands of square metres of flat roof buildings with hardly a solar panel on them at all. Now, it's outside the confines of this application, but it is something that I will be discussing in terms of the local plan in another committee. How do we get additional solar panels, and how do we protect our arable land? Because, as was mentioned tonight, we can't afford to lose arable land when 10% of our grain comes from Ukraine, and we know what's happening there at the moment. So, while in principle I would be in favour of having solar applications, I'm not sure I can support this scheme as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you. We all support green energy, but this does have an impact on the landscape. And I really, really can't imagine in a few years' time having a conversation with somebody saying to me, let's go for a walk in the solar farm, it's really pretty over there. It's on arable farmland. And I've spoken to two farmers around the area, and the yield of grain is approximately 10 tonnes per hectare, very broadly speaking. That's somewhere in the region of 700 tonnes of grain every year. We will have to import that into this country. And we import grain from South America and from Canada on a heavy oil-burning ship. That has a carbon footprint. And I look at that, and I look at the carbon footprint of building this, maintaining it, and dismantling it, and I can't support this application. We've got alternative sites, they've already been mentioned. Factory roofs, warehouses, house roofs coming in. The one that always seems to get missed is railway embankments. Why don't we put solar panels on railway embankments? I really, really cannot understand why we need to put this on a greenfield site. And I do remember about 6 months ago sitting in this room and Councillor Howard Sorrell saying, what's the point in saving the countryside if we're going to wreck the planet? And I thought that was a really good comment. But in this case, we are going to wreck the countryside, and I don't think we're going to save the planet with it. Solar panels, great, not in this location. Not in any location on arable fields. There are better places to put them. So I can't support this application. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. I will be supporting the motion for refusal. I don't think we can justify the use of such good quality arable land for an installation such as this. I have serious concerns about the impact on the local wildlife, and it doesn't really benefit either Bramley or Silchester in any way. And I think when we're considering a plan of this scale, it has to in some way be beneficial to the residents involved. Now, the residents have told us it's not going to be beneficial. It's going to ruin things. It's going to ruin their mental health, their enjoyment of the countryside and the wildlife. There's going to be noise. There are issues as, you know, if there wasn't a problem, a fire, whatever, we're going to get chemicals into the watercourse. There are so many problems with this plan. I mean, I would love to see solar panels on roofs. Again, when we got off the from the bus from the site viewing in Hound Mills, these factory roofs for miles. And you know, there are so many other places that we could put solar panels without using good quality arable land that we need. You know, there has to be a balance, and I don't think a balance is achieved here. So yes, I will be supporting the motion for refusal. I can't support this plan.
Councillor Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. I look at the media and I see week after week councils in the same dilemma that we have here today, and they come up with the same reasons for refusal. Nobody wants them on their arable fields. Nobody wants them near their villages. Nobody wants a forest of wind turbines. Oh, it's spoiling my sea view. 3 years since we declared a climate emergency, and we're still sitting on our backsides doing nothing. And I'm ashamed to be a member of this council. We've declared an emergency, and we've put lots of effort into putting words on paper. We've got wonderful strategies, but what have we actually achieved? And tonight, all I've heard is somewhere else, on top of buildings, waiting for somebody else to come forward. We're doing nothing. We need to seize the initiative, and we're failing this evening. By the sound of it, we're failing. And I'm ashamed to be a member of this committee. I will vote for acceptance of the proposal, the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hussey. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just echoing really everyone else's comments about this is such a difficult application to actually decide on, to come down one way or the other. But I just want to check the reasons for refusal with officers, if I may. Obviously, EM1, the landscape, EM8, okay, which is the commercial and renewable low carbon energy generation. I think there is an adverse environmental impact, and I also think there is a social impact. And EP4, okay, where I think there's lots of biodiversity, and also EM11.
Sorry, Councillor Frost, could I stop you a moment? Councillor Frost, please, could I stop you? It is not your job to give the reasons. It is Councillor Tomlin's job to give the reasons, and you to make a decision based on those reasons. So, unless there are any other hands up for debate, Councillor Gaskell.
I hope, just a point of order, I hope that Councillor Tomlin does consider the rest of the reasons. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make a statement, really, that we're giving ourselves a hard time about renewables and things, but this council has an incinerator just down the road which provides electricity for 10,000 houses. We have one of the largest gas storage facilities in Humberley Grove. We've got a number of biodigesters. We have been doing our bit over the last few years. I noticed solar panels on the council building as well. These things take time to do, and they can be done correctly. So I'd just like to point that out to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? In that case, Councillor Tomlin, would you like to go through your reasons for refusal?
Thank you, Chair. Well, yes, certainly EM1, the impact on the countryside, I think the harm is greater than the benefit. The loss of footpath enjoyment, I think there are a number of subsections really, but it pretty well does all part B, D, E, F and G. Contrary to the Bramley Neighbourhood Plan, NDP Plan, which is policy D1. And then the renewable energy EM8, as in it's not being done, not giving us, it's disadvantaging the land, or loss of land is not a benefit, so it misses on EM8. And I will take on board EM11, the archaeological element. I didn't refer to that particular policy number, but I did refer to some of the archaeology in there. That's where I stand, so I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chair. It's just really to pick up on a couple of points. Clearly members have read the reports. I'm not going to regurgitate what's in there. It's just in terms of what's been said in the debate to make sure that the committee have the correct advice in making the decision. Reference has been made to alternative sites. I think it's been picked up before, but this is this application that you need to consider, not alternatives or where you may wish to see other forms of development. Reference has been made to there not being a community benefit, in particular the number of objections that have been raised. That in itself, clearly what has been raised is material. They've been listed in quite extensive form in the report, but simply the number of objections in itself is not material. Equally, there is not a requirement to show a community benefit for solar farms at this moment in time. There is a similar requirement to show support for onshore wind farms, and there is potential for that to be developed through the energy security strategy that the government's recently published for solar farms, but it's not there yet, so that is not part of your consideration. In terms of the reasons for refusal that Councillor Tomlin has put forward, I suppose my advice would be twofold. One is, as always, to the committee, if you are voting on refusal, is to limit the reasons to refusal to those that you consider to be sustainable. Very importantly, policy EM8 has been referenced, and that is the most important policy. So effectively, in terms of the landscape impact that you've identified in terms of policy EM1, you would need to be satisfied that that impact is of such a significant scale that it outweighs the benefits of the scheme, which is the whole point around policy EM8. And I appreciate that has been picked up in the wording, but it's very important that that's considered. In relation to the second reason for refusal that's now been put forward, and I appreciate Councillor Harvey maybe seconding that in a moment, I think the key thing to consider is whether that is a sustainable reason for refusal. I understand the issue of archaeology in the area is highly sensitive. That has been part of the application, and the documentation submitted by the applicant has been subject to consultation with Hampshire Archaeology, who are satisfied that the development would not be unacceptable in archaeological terms, both in terms of what is proposed and how they're proposing to do it, dealing with Field 1 in a different way in terms of the way that the conditions are worded, and dealing with different ways in which the development will come forward. We suggested conditions can deal with that fact, and I think in those circumstances it would be extremely difficult to defend that at an appeal where conditions can otherwise overcome that reason for refusal. So that would be my advice on that second reason.
Councillor Tomlin, would you like to come back on that?
Well, as always, I hear what Mike says, and bow down to his professional knowledge, but I still would want something for EM11 in there, because it just says it in condition for approval number 6, it would not give rise to adverse impacts on archaeological potential. Well, if you cover the area over, then it sort of does. So it's contrary to that particular point, which brings in EM8 as well. But
okay,
thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Harvey, you seconded it, you're content with those conditions. Thank you. Been moved and seconded for refusal. Certainly will we. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? That's everybody except. Thank you. And those against refusal? Councillor Hussey, that will be recorded. Thank you. Application is refused. Catherine.
Thank you. So if I just reiterate, that application has been moved for refusal, and that is giving consideration to the adverse impact on landscape character and visual amenity and the enjoyment of the public right of way in the countryside, contrary to policies EM1, EM8 and D1 of the neighbourhood plan. And a second reason for refusal with regards to the harm to the historic environment having regard to the archaeological potential, contrary to policy EM11.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Thank you.